Welcome to Tales of the Cocktail. I'm Robert Hess. Today we're doing a very special interview called Across the Bar. It's an interview special that we're taking and talking with different bartenders to understand more of the insights of who they are, how they got there, and what they think about bartending, mixology, cocktails, and a little bit of New Orleans in general. Today my guest is Audrey Saunders. Audrey Saunders owns the Pegu Club in New York City, one of the premier bars there, and probably the bar that started the whole cocktail revolution, causing bars across the country to better understand the prospect of quality bars, quality cocktails, working with customers, and taking mixology to the next level. Let's welcome Audrey Saunders.
Thank you.
Audrey, so now you're approaching 6 years at the Pegu Club, right?
Yes, yeah. We opened August 29th, 2005.
And I'm sure the entire process had its ups and downs and its highlights and lowlights. From a cocktail scene in general, do you think New York has benefited an awful lot from the Pegu Club there?
I'm very happy with how things have unfurled on the cocktail scene. When I first opened, things like Punta Mez and chartreuse and ingredients that we basically take for granted these days were barely understood by most of the American bartenders on the scene. I try to do everything a little differently. Basically in a time zone where you would see 20 to 30 vodkas on the back bar, I opened with 5 vodkas. And I kept them tucked away. I opened with 27 gins.
Really? 5 vodkas and 27 gins?
Yes.
I mean, like here, I'm lucky if I can find 5 gins behind the bar sometimes. I mean, like 27 gins.
I had 27 gins, and at that point, it wasn't easy to find 27 gins. But I understood how important gin is in a cocktail, and for me, to understand gin or to master a gin cocktail is really to master the art of cocktails, because different gins have different flavor profiles. You know, we look at gin like, oh, it's just gin, but like the botanicals, if you look at botanicals in gin, it can be very much like a liquid spice rack. So if you were going to season a steak, or you're going to season a flaky fish, would you use the same seasonings for both? No, you wouldn't. So even though gin is clear, the botanical structures are such that you could really distinguish them in that particular manner. And for us, it was very, very important that the drinks be perfect. And not necessarily from an egotistical point of view, but that the drinks be perfect, because otherwise it wouldn't catch on. People would come by and go, oh yeah, you know, it's just another hyped up bar, and you know, we went and we saw it, it was great, but it was all right, okay. And like the drinks were spot on, and I think that really changed the entire thought press in America. A lot of people hated gin. It's like, oh, I can't stand gin. I got sick on gin. You know, I don't like the smell of it. But we were utilizing gin as a component of a dish, of a proposed dish, and I think the drinks were so well balanced that people were like, wow, this isn't like the punch in the face that I got in that last gin cocktail I had. And I could not have done it with just extraordinary opening staff. I had Chad Solomon, Phil Ward, Toby Maloney, Brian Miller, Jim Meehan, extraordinary, and others, but just really extraordinary force behind the bar, and everybody was in that same free-thinking mindset. So we had a lot of work to do, but we did it, and we got the point across, and here we are today.
Now clearly this intensity and insights about cocktails, mixology, and gin is not something you were born with, but it's something that, you know, you had to kind of formulate. Where did you grow up exactly?
I grew up in Long Island, outside of New York, and I can remember going to my first house party when I was a teenager, and I didn't understand, because at that point I was still drinking like on Red Hot Rocks, and I went to my friend's party, and he handed me a pint glass, and I was like, oh yeah, I've got gin and grapefruit juice, and he filled the pint glass up to here with gin, and then he just splashed it with, you know, a little bit of grapefruit, and oh, okay, great, you know. And then the next thing I knew, I woke up on the bathroom floor. It was 5 o'clock in the morning, and I swore I would never drink gin again. And then flash forward to 1995, I had started bartending at a place called the Waterfront Ale House, and the manager there was a good friend of Dale DeGroff's. And he tried to talk me out of bartending. He said, "Oh, it's a really hard business, and there's no insurance, and I'm not going to like it." But I did. And I think he wanted me to like it too, but I think he just really wanted to open my eyes to the realities of bartending. And it was a lot of hard work. It was a lot of hauling cases of wine and beer and a lot of dirty work, but I was willing to do it, and I loved it. The minute I stepped behind the bar, I knew I was home. The minute I stepped back there, and I thought, wow, this is really what I want to do. And so he said, "Okay, I can't talk you out of bartending." And then he pulled out a magazine, and there was a one-page profile on this gentleman, Dale DeGroff. And Dale DeGroff was teaching a one-night seminar at New York University. He said, "Well, if you're going to stay in the business, he said, you need to take this seminar." I said, "Well, okay, I will." And I took the seminar, and I was just amazed, because here was this man doing cocktails at a culinary level. And this was 1995, and I remember the first drink he served me was a blood and sand, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." It sounds disgusting. When you think about the ingredients, it's scotch, cherry herrings, sweet vermouth, and orange juice, and it sounds insipid, but it was alchemic.
Well, and part of the problem with that drink too is many times when I have it, it is rather insipid.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how is it that Dale can actually provide you a drink that you're not really understanding at that spot?
Well, because Dale, obviously Dale has a mastery of cocktails. I mean, for people who don't know Dale, I mean, he is a master mixologist. People tend not to like the word mixologist, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I mean, it shows it's not necessarily the bartending aspect of what we do, but it's actually the crafting of cocktails and the understanding of ingredients and how they work together. And how they behave apart, and and if you have a different scotch per se, how does that work with the rest of the components, and how does it have to be tweaked? And everything needs to be tweaked. So Dale was the beverage director at Rainbow for many years. He was still at Rainbow when I met him, and I couldn't work for Rainbow obviously because I was green, and Rainbow was a union shop. But I went up to Dale after the class, and I handed him my business card, and I said, "I want to be the best I can be, and I'll work for you for free. Here's my card." He said, "Oh, okay." So after that, I didn't really expect much. I went back to work, just loving it, and then like a month later, I got this call from Dale DeGroff, and he's like, "Hey, honey, you want to go make cocktails with the mayor with me?" And I was like, "Sure." Sure. Let's go up to Gracie Mansion and make cocktails for the mayor. And we did. There was this great lawn party that they were having, and I had I had an easy drink. It was a Mary Pickford, which is just rum, pineapple, and grenadine. But it was more about, I think Dale wanted to see how I would react or interact with a large crowd, and we just had the best time ever.
And this was your first time doing some work with Dale.
The first time I did work with Dale.
Prior to this, you were just working at the Waterfront Ale House.
Right.
Was it beer or beer and cocktails?
Oh, the Waterfront is so the Waterfront Ale House is pretty much an institution in Brooklyn Heights and New York. A lot of the industry, like a lot of the restaurant managers who lived in Brooklyn would always go there after work. Sam Barbieri is the owner, phenomenal man. Just has a real passion for craft beer. So in 1995, he had 17 taps of artisanal beer and I think about 80 bottles behind it. But he had also been a chef. Loves his barbecue, had a very eclectic menu. And aside from that, he would do beer tastings, he would do beer dinners. Do 5-course Chimay dinners, and every time I wanted to learn something new about the product, I just have to turn around and look at the back bar because he always had something there. He had one of the largest Scotch selections I had ever seen. He probably had 80 bottles, and at that point he had more rye than anybody in New York. He had Van Winkle rye. My first taste of Van Winkle rye, I was like, "Oh my God, what is that?" So that's a special rye, and as I would find out later on. But Sam was very pivotal in my craft, and he was always behind it. He was always even though it was the kind of bar, we had soda guns there, but Sam always had fresh juice in the refrigerator. He was always doing all sorts of interesting infusions. So it was just a phenomenal experience. And Sam and Dale also knew each other. Dale would also go to the Dale House. So I would continue for the next few years to do private events. Rainbow Room did a lot of charity events off premise. So Dale would always call me and say, "Oh, come on, let's go do this event and let's do that." And I was always thrilled because there wasn't a school you could go to learn the craft. I'm sure there were bartending schools, but nothing on this level. So I would go up to Rainbow before we have an event. I'd cut 300 twists, or I'd juice, or whatever it took. I did it, and then finally in 1999, Rainbow was opening another bar called Blackbird, and Dale called me up and he said, "Hey, you want to come over to Blackbird with me?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." From there, we started together.
So in the meantime, you're learning about cocktails here, either at the Waterford Ale House or with these little one-off events that Dale was doing.
Yeah.
What were some of the key lessons you learned in that process?
Well, I learned a lot from Corey Hill, who was the bar manager at the Ale House. He also loved cocktails, and he was a connoisseur of fine spirits as well. So we were always tasting various spirits and talking about them. We weren't creating cocktails. Again, it wasn't on the level that Rainbow was, but we were always tinkering with various ingredients and trying to get a better understanding of them. So it was really between Dale. My education with cocktails didn't really begin until I started at Blackbird. And it was at Blackbird really where it was really an immersion process. Dale had an extensive library of rare or out-of-print books that he would encourage me to read. I didn't realize what they were. I mean, behind the bar, he had a Jerry Thomas behind the bar. David Emery behind the bar, and he just pulled them out and he'd say, "Oh yeah, take this one home or read it, whatever." And at that point you could still pick up. I remember picking up a David Emery for $5. $5 online, and now what's it going for?
400 or whatever.
400.
Yeah.
I've seen it for $8. If you can get them. But at that point it was just a lot of studying and a lot of tinkering, and then. It was that same year that I stumbled across your website, drinkboy.com, and there was this tiny little budding community. That's where, obviously, I met you. I met Gary Reagan there, and Marty Reagan, Dave Wondrich. Dale was on there, and there was just a lot of Martin Luderoff was on there. Just a number of key people in there, and we were all trying to get a better understanding of the craft of the cocktail. So it was really on you really provided the forum for all of us to talk and decipher or disseminate information, and it was really your website that allowed us all to grow and expand. So thank you, even though you are a civilian. I always make fun of Robert for that reason. Just because for a civilian, he's probably more versed and educated and knowledgeable than a lot of the industry. So thank you.
Thank you. So we have Blackbird opening in 99.
99
it was. And how long were you Blackbird?
It was short-lived. It lasted a year. It was unfortunate because it was in an area in Midtown called Midtown Financial Center, and the bar was very successful. But it wasn't just a bar; it was a bar and a restaurant, and so 75% of it was restaurant. And even though we did a good lunch business, but you have to fill the restaurant in order to pay the rent. And at the end of the day, people weren't sticking around Midtown Financial for dinner. We have a great cocktail hour, but after that, so it lasted for a year, and then after it closed, Dale started consulting. Dale went off to London to meet Jonathan Downey of Match Bar. He started consulting with Jonathan, and I stayed within the company. I went over to their sister restaurant, Beacon Restaurant, there I worked with Chef Waldy Malouf and Marie Maher, who is the general manager. And Marie was also an extraordinary beverage background. Everybody who had worked for the umbrella of Rainbow and Windows in the World, everybody was just very, very strong background in spirits and wine. So I had a fierce beverage education from there, and learned. At that point, started tinkering, started creating cocktails there, and Marie was really, she's a dynamo. She was just wonderful to work with, always encouraging. She's like, just, you're very talented, just, continue to create. And I would always go into the walk-in, and I had, even like Waldy's, in service, he's on the line, and I'm like, oh, can you taste this, Waldy? Come up to him right in the middle of service, and he would stop and make time and give criticism or whatever. But he and Marie were really behind the beverage program, so they really allowed me to grow.
Where exactly was Beacon located at?
I was on 56th Street, between 5th and 6th Avenues.
And
that was actually the first cocktail I created there. It was a ginger ale.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That you're well known for it.
Yeah.
So you have all over the place. Now, is Beacon still around?
Beacon is still around. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful restaurant with wood oven. It's just this phenomenal American food there. Wood oven smoked oysters and all sorts of Argentinian grill. It's just delicious.
And then after Beacon, where'd you go?
I had two opportunities at that point. So because Windows in the World was the sister to Rainbow Room and Beacon, and Windows in the World was known. It had the best wine program. I wouldn't even say in the city, probably in the country at that point. Andre Emmer Zimmerman and Kevin Zralli ran the wine program there, and Kevin is also renowned for his wine force and his books on wine. And I was very interested in wine as well, so they had offered me an apprentice position down in Windows to become like an apprentice cellar assistant.
So after moving out of the cocktail world?
I would have moved out of the cocktail world, and I would have gone down to Windows and started working with wine. That wasn't necessarily my intention, but I really wanted. The education could have been extraordinary, so I was like, oh yeah. And then I had another opportunity to go to a restaurant downtown called the Tonic to work with a new chef who I knew, Joe Fortunato, who's a phenomenal chef. And basically become the beverage director there. And they had this extraordinary Brunswick bar. It was 65 feet long. It was just mahogany and lead crystal. It was just
so it was a real Brunswick bar.
Real Brunswick bar. It was built in 1889 by Augustus Busch. For his favorite bartender is the story, but yeah, stunning bar, and so there was those two opportunities on the plate, and with the apprentice position I would have had to take like a drastic pay cut, and with the beverage director position I would have quadrupled my salary. So at that point I'm like, well, pay rent or enjoy that and and the creative control of having a beverage program. So I chose the beverage program, and I really expanded there. Like at that point, it was basically like really taking out my own car and driving it around. And at that point, I had a basic understanding of what was going on behind the scenes with regards to purchasing, and I was getting fairly proficient in the back of the house and in the business of the bar, beverage costs, glassware, things like that. So I felt comfortable, and it was a wonderful opportunity for me to start to develop a repertoire and really get very, very creative. And it was a very cool environment to do it in. So we worked there, and the guests were so excited about the drinks we were doing. And there. I created the Old Cuban there. At that point, I had also done the Jamaican Firefly. So there were a few drinks that I had started to develop down there, and what's this? Homemade ginger beer? Like I had learned how to make homemade ginger beer at Beacon from one of the cooks there, Charlene. Charlene was from the islands, and this was like her grandmother's recipe. So she showed me this recipe for ginger beer, and I was like, wow, this is phenomenal. And I just tweaked it a little bit and started utilizing that. So all of a sudden, in this point where you didn't see anything fresh behind the bar, we were doing fresh lemon and lime, which I had learned from Dale, and fresh ginger beer and fresh, grapefruit or whatever. And because the general public had never been exposed to that, they're like, my God, this is, the cocktails were bright and crisp and really had presence. So it was a blast. I mean, it was really just a time. It was kind of like if you walk in and you look at this bar, it was almost like this big, elegant Cheers. It was this big, elegant, mahogany bar. You don't really expect, cocktails to come off like this big, old school mahogany bar, but that's what we were doing. And we also had, great beer, great wine, and Joey's food. So it was just, we'd sit down at the bar, have like a great little meal, great cocktails, and people were just eating it up. So it was wonderful. And that didn't last the year either, unfortunately, because that was just before 9/11. And at that point, I was very fortunate that I hadn't gone down to Windows on the World, because I would have been there that day. And it was a very sad day because I had lost a lot of us. Dale had lost a lot of our friends. So it was that, and then after that, it was very hard. I remember the day of 9/11, we just basically took the cocktail menus off tables and kept the doors open for people who just really needed to come in and have a drink and talk. So at that point, we were downtown. Basically, the food and beverage business just fell out from downtown. You couldn't get downtown because it was basically, it was quartered off for months. So at that point, obviously, the restaurant wasn't doing well, and it eventually closed. And I was not really sure. I think 9/11 shook me so hard. I was like, I wasn't really sure if I wanted to go back into the business. So I was like, you know what? I tucked a little bit of money away. I'm going to take a few months off and just chill out and smell the roses and see. It's like, if you love something, let it go. And a few months later, Dale's like, Audrey, what? I remember I had just I was just playing around with my computer all those months and, researching cocktails, and Dale had just started consulting with the Carlyle Hotel in New York, and they had this beautiful bar, Bemelman's bar at the Carlyle, and Bemelman's was this quintessential New York bar. And if you go into Bemelman's was named after Ludwig Bemelmans, who was the creator and illustrator and author of all of the Madeline books for girls. So you walk into this room and there's just whimsical cartoons all around you. And the first time I walked in, it was almost like a ghost town, and it was just like, wow. And it was like bars, since Prohibition, bars, especially hotel bars, weren't really doing, extensive cocktails. I mean, you could get a Negroni, you could get a Manhattan, you can get a Martini, a Cosmo, a Margarita, you could get the basics, but nobody had a cocktail program. So they were refurbishing Bemelman's, and they had hired Dale to, basically revamp, from, top to bottom, glassware program, everything, bartenders, and they said, well, after you're gone, we need to have a beverage director here. Who's the best man for the job? And Dale said, well, the best man for the job is a woman I know. And he approached me with it, and I was a little in awe because I thought, at that point I'd been studying, bars and old bars and hotel bars, and I thought, my God, women don't go behind hotel bars. Traditionally it was always a man's place, and the women were always serving. You sure? I mean, Bellman's is a revered old school bar, and he's like, well, Rosewood took it over. They're a very progressive company, and they would love to meet you. And I was like, well, okay. I went in there, and I met Peter French, who was the general manager at that time, and he had just come from the Mandarin in Hong Kong. He's a 6'6" strapping British man with 50 pinstripe suits, and it was just extraordinary experience working with him. He was such a perfectionist. He could sit here and look across the room from 60 feet, notice something was off on a table, and he trained me to have those eyes. We started working there, and that was extraordinary. It was a union house. The head bartender had been there for 45 years, the second in line for 40 years, the third in line for 30 years, and I think the new kid had 8 years.
Okay, so you're talking about a bar that had gotten kind of dusty, gotten kind of old. Yeah. Bartender's been working there then, and then Dale comes in and turns the place around functionally. How does it work with bartenders who've been there that long? Because these are the same bartenders that were there when it's dusty and stuff, and now suddenly they're now in the rebirth.
Right.
And in not quite say so, but union bartenders on top of that normally don't take well to that sort of change. How did that fit?
Well, it was, I was very fortunate because I was a bartender. I mean, that's I am. I consider myself a bartender now, even though I'm not behind the bar very much. It's who I am at the core. And I think the problem that happens with union, we like to blame it on the unions, but it's not necessarily the case. I think what happens, especially when a consultant goes into a hotel, is that the consultant goes in. It's all about the consultant's program. And these guys are like, okay, here's another program we're getting. And the consultant comes, trains, installs, and then leaves. Maybe he comes back a few times a year to retrain, whatever. But these guys really have no support, like daily support, unless you're training the beverage manager to work with these guys. But in a union shop, it's a different dynamic. And I think, first of all, being a woman, I don't think they were really quite sure what to do with me. And I said, well, really, I'm a bartender, And I said, really what happens in this room stays in this room. I know that, you guys deal with a very, very upscale clientele, and a lot of them can be enormously difficult, just because perhaps they didn't like the way you put your napkin down in front of them. So I understand that because I work behind a bar as well. I said, and I want you to know that I'm here to back you. And, unless you do something like, short of setting the room on fire, I'm not going to be the sort of person looking to write you up or get you out of your job. I'm really going to be here for you, and I will go to bat for you. And they were, well, okay. Said, and we're going to install a cocktail program that I am going to work in such a way that is going to be easier for you to execute. And at the end of the day, you are going to watch your check averages and your tip pool triple. And they're like, well, okay. And then the other thing that we did in that room is we brought in fresh music. We brought in Lawson Harris Trio, and Lawson is this wonderful jazz musician who plays jazz standards. And he was actually brought in only for the opening week because the Barbara Carroll, who had played in that room for years, wasn't able to be there. And Lawson just had this dynamic sound. He was young, handsome. He was behind the piano. Then his trio, Marcus on trumpet. They just really woke the place up. So it's this sexy room. Amazing jazz, great cocktails. The room just started to swing. And all of a sudden, it was literally like an overnight overnight sensation. People were coming, and it's like, wow, I can get a pisco sour with a real egg at the Carlyle. You know, we had so much fun with the menu. So I stayed there. I stayed there for 5 years, and I did go to bat, and I did go to bat for the bartenders. I fought for them when I thought it was fair, and I was always looking out for them, and I gave them a program that they could execute very well. And at the end of the day, they were, you know, they allowed me to come behind the bar whenever I wanted, which was, you know, unheard of. Okay, you know, take over the bar, you know, we're taking our breaks, and, you know, managers don't do that there. So for me, it was like really kind of an honor because I had gotten the respect of basically, you know, the union there, the union delegate in the room, and the head delegate for the hotel, who is also now the delegate for the city of New York. You know, we had a lot of conversations about, you know, what it was, and it was really about service at the end of the day. It wasn't about ego. It was about service. Out for the guests, and what's fair is fair. And we just had so much fun. We just changed the menu there 4 times a year. Tom and Jerry season came. I pulled out 100 Tom and Jerry cups, and I had like the old cups going out on the floor and the bowls, and like, what is this? So people like, you know, we were doing things up there, you know, even in, you know, in 2002, 2003, 2004 that nobody had seen. And pulling out old classics, you know, San Martin's. People really loved it. So it was almost the clientele, like the regulars in Bellman's use, almost like a Charles H. Baker book. You know, sailing around the world on the yacht. Old school bum and bonds, and then you'd have characters who would come across. It was almost like, you know, Rick's American Cafe. You had everybody coming in because it wasn't just a hotel bar. You know, anybody could come in off the street. So it was just this crazy dynamic of personalities all the time.
And all this got me prepared for your next bar, which is the Pegu Club.
Yeah. So a dear friend of mine, Julie Reiner, who at that point, when she came to town, I was I had just moved over to the Tonic, and she came from San Francisco, and she was working downtown in a little place called C3, and I remember Dale had a gig for me to go on, and he's like, oh, I got this really great out-of-town bartender, you know, I'm pulling her in. I'm like, oh, awesome. He's like, go to this location. So we go to this location, and it's like this desolate street downtown. It's just she and me, and like nobody else on the street. She's like, Audrey? I'm like, Julie? And we just, like, within seconds, we hit it off. And we did that gig that night, and we had a hoot together. So we had just gotten to be very fast friends. You know, and then she and her partner Susan would come to Tonic and hang out at my bar. I would go to her bar and watch her, like, what is that, a pineapple infusion? It's like, wow, that's really cool. I mean, and you know, I mean, we laugh at it, but I mean, like, nobody would think, what's a pineapple infusion? You know? Like, how do you do that? She's like, oh, let me show you. Like, you know, so like, you know, we're teaching each other stuff, and you know, and that just kept going. So she kept. So at that point, after C3, she had opened Flatiron, and I was at the Carlyle at that point, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. I went to the opening of Flatiron, hung out there a lot, and I was happy for her. And I knew at one point I wanted my own place, but I wasn't looking for it. I mean, I was really loving the Carlyle. I was learning a lot from the Carlyle about the business and financials, and I thought, well, you know, if opportunity comes, I said, but right now I'm happy here. So you know, she'd come up to the Carlyle, and then at one point I met one of her business partners by chance at Flatiron, and he's very, very intelligent. He's kind of quiet, reserved, and we just had a conversation. We just sat down and we just started talking about life. And we started for about 2 or 3 hours. We were just nonstop. And Julie at that point told me that there was another project that her partners had wanted to develop. You know, and she was like, "Oh, that's great, awesome." And then she came to the Carlyle and she said, oh, you know, after I'd met Kevin and had that conversation with him, she came back up to the Carlyle and she said, oh, you remember that project, you know, we were talking about? I was like, yeah, yeah. And she's like, well, we want you to take it. Like, we want you involved. And I was like, oh, okay, you know, let's talk about it. So I met the rest of her partners. And, you know, and she and I had that conversation. It's like, listen, you know, you and I are dear friends, and, you know, I don't want to step on your toes. I don't want this to destroy our friendship. And I said, but if I'm going to have a project, I need it to be my project, like my vision, whatever. And, you know, like my sticklers, like my contract with them. I mean, even though we had a proper, we were working on a proper contract. My stipulations for my contract were that I had fresh juice, no soda guns, and glassware. Like for me, that was really what I wanted. You know, everything else could work itself out. But those were sticking points for me. So they're like, sure, okay. And they gave me creative carte blanche and to realize my vision. And I even remember, you know, the name. I said, well, you know, I'm thinking about the name, and like I didn't read the books, and I said, well, it's the Pegu Club. And they're like, what? Like club? It's a club? Like, no, it's not a club. It's not a club like New York clubs. You know, it's the Pegu Club. And at that point, I had gone over to London a number of times and made a lot of friends there. Started working with Tonic and we started doing some work together, and Dick Bradsell as well. And for me, you know, I really started mastering gin at that point. So Pegu Club was the original British Officers Club in Rangoon in the late 1800s. And I thought that if I'd named a place the Pegu Club, it would be my homage to gin, to elegant cocktail culture, and to the UK. It was a gin drinking nation, and I thought that if I named it that my peers and my friends would get it, and they did. It was hard in the beginning, but we did. I remember the boys, my bartenders told me after the fact that the first few guests that we had said, "Oh, we want a vodka cocktail," and he's like, "We have got like a great cocktail. It's a vodka infusion. It's infused with juniper and citrus." And they're like, yeah, that sounds really good. It's like, okay. And they would serve these juniper and citrus infused vodka cocktails. And guests were like, wow, okay. And after, obviously, you know, they came clean after the fact. People were like, that's gin, really? But we, you know, everything was so well balanced that, you know, they were like, this is amazing. And then they'd serve the same drink with just vodka afterwards. And, you know, like, oh wow, it doesn't have the same flat. You know, and again, I want to say it wasn't dissing. We weren't dissing vodka. You know, and I need to make that clear. You know, the point that we were trying to get across with that was that we needed bartenders to start to work with gin and whiskeys and bitters, because if they didn't develop that repertoire and start to understand it, the cocktail culture would never grow. We would never be able to create and put forth cocktails on the sophisticated level that we enjoy today if it weren't for those basics. If these guys had never gotten away from vodka, we never would have gotten there. So that's why we were pushing so hard on the gin education and understanding, you know, the botanicals, the proofs, you know, how they dilute, you know, I mean, there were so many different things. Does this gin work better with lime juice or lemon juice? You know, I mean, there's a number of things that you really have to think about, and it's like thinking like a chef. So we dissected everything. We would come up with a recipe, we would work a recipe 80 to 100 times, and then once we worked it, we'd try it with 6 or 8 different gins or 8 different spirits, and then I would tell the guys, all right, you love this recipe? They're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, now do something that you feel totally uncomfortable with. Take an ingredient off the shelf that does not feel right to you, and put a half a teaspoon in. You know, just you know, I used to refer to it as driving off a cliff, because you'd never know, and it taught them to start to move out of the box, out of their comfort zone, and try to experiment with things. So we did a lot of that, developed, and just went from there.
And so with Pegu, you actually, you know, help people better understand gin cocktails in specific. but all cocktails in general, as well as training an awful lot of the young bartenders that have now moved on to create their own places.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
Oh, you know, I guess as a female, it was almost maternal for me. I just always, you know, I enjoy teaching very much. So I put a lot into the educational factor, and I thought, well, you know, if you're going to work at Pegu, this is part of the process. I expect you to create drinks. Because I didn't want Pegu just to be about my drinks. I wanted Pegu to be about everybody who worked there. Because that was really how, you know, I mean, obviously it becomes a family there, and then there's ownership. You know, and if you have your drinks on the menu, you know, you're going to be proud of that. And it's going to inspire you to create more and to become more independent and develop your own skills. So we're always pushing that. But I was very, very proud. Even, you know, Eric Simpkins, who he came up here and, you know, he worked with me for a while, and then he went down to Atlanta. He opened Eugene, you know, and then I have Alistair Burgess, who came over, and now he's open. You know, he's British. He worked with me for a couple of years. He went back to London. He's got his own place. Phil Ward went on with Brian Miller to open Death and Company, and then Lyowell. Jim Meehan went on to open PDT. You know, so many of the boys, you know, Chad Solomon with his girlfriend Christy Pope have Cuff and Buttons catering. I'm really proud of all of them, you know, and what they've accomplished. But you know, I wouldn't have hired them in the first place if I didn't think that, you know,
that they could accomplish.
Absolutely. They were all just super sharp, you know, super creative, you know, and they got it. You know, they really got it. So it made my job a lot easier.
Well, I mean, I appreciate the time you spent with us talking about your history. We do have a couple of questions I'm going to try to ask all the people in the interviews, and I want to kind of find out what your answers are. Okay. The first question is, what is your favorite cocktail?
What day is it? What time is it? Is it Friday night? Is it Sunday afternoon? I don't have a favorite. It's a terrible answer. I don't have a favorite. You know, it's kind of like saying, you know, okay, you've got 10 kids. Who's your favorite? You know, I mean, like, you know, when I create cocktails, you know, 80 times, 100 times, it's kind of like birthing it, and you put it out into the universe, and then you create another one. But they all mean something to you, you know, and they're all special, but, you know, I like them all. I don't have a favorite. Sorry.
That's a fair answer. What ingredients would you like to see get used more behind the bar that is today?
I would say, obviously I'm going to say gin, and even though we are talking to our community right now, if we look at the cocktail community at large, it's still a fairly small community. Even though we think it's large, and we look at, you know, we look at the size of tails this year. If we look at the country and the world as a whole, there is, you know, with the cocktail community, you know, in each of the cities or is small. It's a very small percentage of what's really going on in the bigger picture. So I would say that I don't want gin just to be used more. I want it to be understood more.
So next we know, what bartending practice would you like to see less of?
I don't know if it's a bartending practice per se. I want to sit down at a bar. I don't want. Yeah, if I'm going to the bar for my own experience, I don't necessarily want the bartender to tell me, no, you don't want that, or this is what I want you to have. Like, I don't want to be dictated to by the bartender or schooled. Even if he doesn't know who I am, like, I'm not sitting down for, if I want an education at a bar, you know, and I show an interest, okay. But if I'm sitting at a cocktail bar, you know, please don't start to educate me. I just want to have some fun. You know, I think the whole idea of going into a bar, like my ideal bar would really be a bar that has got a lively environment. It's a fun atmosphere. and you sit down, the service is wonderful, and all of a sudden you order a cocktail and it's amazing. It just happens to be amazing, but it's not the focus. So I think it's just got to be this I think it's great. I mean, what we've done so far now, like we have craft bars, but I think we need to develop I guess the style of bar, you know, to make it less serious. I would like to just go in and I want the whole package. You know, I'd like to walk into a dive bar. I think it would be really fun to develop a dive bar. You know, like a place where you go in and there's like a funky jukebox and, you know, like, what is this? And you sit down and this dive bar has got kick-ass drinks. You know, because I think that's, you know, there's no pretension there. So I think that would be a really cool.
And the last question is, what bartending practice would you like to see more of?
Well, certainly hospitality and friendliness. I think you just want to walk into a bar, you know, and if the bar is 3 deep, you know, it's like every time you go to PJ Clark's in New York, you know, and you walk into that bar and there's, you know, it's packed. But the minute you walk in the bar, the bartender looks up and he's like, I got you. It's like all of a sudden they look you in the eyes and it's a smile. It's like, I got you, and you know that they've seen you, and they do get you. It's like, and there's always this continual. It's an embracement. It's like don't worry, you're in my hands right now. I'm going to take care of you, and they follow through. You know, just not the, you know. I'll never forget it. Actually, am I allowed to tell people that we're engaged?
You were allowed.
Okay. So when we went to that bar in Seattle and we sat down and the bartender, you know, was really snarky, and I think there was us and then there was just 2 other guys and he was in the corner talking to the 2 other guys, you know, and we look at the cocktail menu and he's like, he just comes over. There was no greeting. He's like, yeah, what do you want? I'm like, hi, how are you? You know. He turns to me. He's like, oh yeah, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine. How are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm fine, thank you. He was like, okay, now that we got that out of the way, and it was just like, he was almost annoyed that, you know, I just said, hi, how are you? I was really kind of put off by that. And I was like, you know, I'm never coming back to this bar ever again, even though the food was great. It was, you know, I don't want to have that experience.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate this time we spent helping the audience better understand who Audrey Saunders is. I mean, I know who she is very well, but the rest of the people probably don't. Audience have any questions?
Well, you did answer one question, kind of ambiguously as far as your favorite cocktail, but do you have a favorite gin?
No. I work with Plymouth, Beefeater, and Tanqueray, Junipero, sometimes Old Raj. Those would be my go-tos. But, and even Brokers is pretty good. Those would be my front line. But even with that, I will still go behind them. Like, those to me have the most classic London dry structure. One is, you know, if I look at Tanqueray, it's beautiful, maybe like juniper. It's like a big juniper profile. If I look at Beefeater, the orange and citrus, it's got a big citrus profile. If I look at Plymouth, it's a softer gin, it's a lower proof, and it's delicate and gauzy. So it's really kind of like, okay, this is black pepper. You know, I don't want to say salt and pepper because, you know, but they're each so distinctively different that they serve different purposes. So if I'm doing a soft gin cocktail, if I'm working with apricot or gentle flavors, mentally I'd go to Plymouth first. If I'm working with you know, more striking, aggressive flavors, ginger, either Beefeater or Tanqueray. The proof is higher. If I'm going to dilute the cocktail with soda, I'm probably going to. I might pick, either Beefeater or Tanqueray because the proof is higher, and if I dilute it with tonic, then the higher proof will be diluted, but it'll still have a structure. So it depends on what I'm doing to the drink and what I'm working with.
I had another question for you. What would say you had a position opening at your establishment, what would you be looking for in a new prospective employee that would be applying for a job as a bartender?
A great personality.
So the personality overshadows the skills that.
You don't have to have any skills. You don't have, and I think a lot of times it's easier if you don't have any skills, because I was very fortunate to work with Dale very early on in my career, and it was easier for him to train me because I hadn't yet developed any bad habits. So if I have a very young bartender, I get to mold him and teach him proper methodology and whatever, without having to take the time and break a habit that he might already have, which takes time. But if I have somebody with a wonderful personality who's a people person and who really enjoys serving, then I get to train that person, and I have this wonderful bartender who's still that wonderful person that I hired.
Could you comment a little bit more on bartenders of the past, as you was explaining, basically had to learn on the job from previous bartenders.
Absolutely.
And today there's more of an education, field of education. There's a lot of certifications out there. Could you expand on that a little bit, of what's happening in the industry today?
Well, there are a number. I mean, a lot of my friends are actually starting to offer courses. Bar schools per se, we haven't yet seen we have BAR, obviously, Paul, Pegu, Dale, Dave Weinrich, Doug Frost, Steve Olson, and they have BAR, and they're also doing a program with Pernod Ricard Bar Smarts, and they're basically moving around the country, offering rigorous, intensive training in spirits, mostly spirits with a touch on cocktails, and I think that is very, very important for any bartender who really wants to grow, because you can't create a good cocktail unless you understand the spirit profiles, and you don't do that unless you have an opportunity to taste dry, taste the 6 different ryes, and understand what's going on in each one, and why this one is a good distillate, why this one isn't such a good distillate, what goes on with each. And I think once you have an understanding of the spirits, then you really can bring something to the table with your cocktails. You're starting to see training courses by bartenders. Not necessarily intensive cocktail programs yet, and that's actually something that we're looking to do at one point, is really open up almost like an institute for education where bartenders can come and spend a week or two and really go through intensive training. It's exciting, but we have enough craft bars out there right now where bartenders, if they're fortunate enough to get a position in those places, they will get a great foundation. And I think basically in America right now, there seems to be. Obviously there are differences in technique, depending on what family you come from, or what part of the country you come from. But there's a general standard for things. There's a general understanding for foundations, and if you go, whether it's Los Angeles, Seattle, New York, Florida, Boston, New Orleans, there is a good solid foundation, and if somebody goes and works in one of those bars, they'll get it there.
It's also neat to see how the bartenders are coming together under the USBG, the United States Bartenders Guild. And there seems to be more of a movement of that professionalization of becoming a bartender.
Yeah, people look at it as a real position now. We're forced to be reckoned with. In the old days, it was always like, oh, you bartend? Oh, so what do you want to do?
Yeah.
What's your real job? You aspiring actor? It's like, no, I'm a bartender. And I think that's why, and I think that's always the knee-jerk reaction. Like right now, when you ask, you ask the bartenders, oh, you're a mixologist? No, I'm a bartender. And it's not so much that being a mixologist is bad. It's that we're trying to get across the point that we're proud to be bartenders. It's no longer, yeah.
Well, hopefully you enjoy this whole across the bar experience, helping to understand who Audrey is, who the Pegu Club is, and maybe a little bit of New Orleans as well. We'll have other interviews online as well, so check out those. I'll be talking with Jeff Berry tomorrow and Dale DeGroff the next day. And together, all these people illustrate how bartenders are changing the world and helping you have better cocktails. Thank you.